We've seen an outbreak of violence between the two main armed actors in Sudan, the Sudan Armed Forces and the militia group, the Rapid Support Forces. They have been battling for control not only of the country, but in the city of Khartoum, the capital of almost 10 million people. The Sudan Armed Forces is led by General Mohammed Fattah al-Burhan. He's a traditional military leader. He came up through the ranks and is seen as a kind of a traditional Arab elite in the country. He is countered by General Hamdan Dagalo, otherwise known as Hemeti. Hemeti rose up through what was then the Janjaweed militia in Darfur, which was carrying out the Scorched Earth campaign in the early 2000s at the time of the Darfur conflict, to lead the Janjaweed, and saw it transformed into what is now the Rapid Support Forces.
Sudan has been in the grip of military power literally since independence in the 50s. Coups are common in Sudan, but starting in 2018, the population had enough. They had what they call an uprising. Some people call it a revolution. That revolution eventually led to the downfall of then President Bashir. The military deposed them, except that the military did not turn power to the civilians as the civilian wanted. The crux of the conflict now between the two, because it's really about between these two people, it's the integration of the RSF. It's been asked that the RSF be fully integrated within the Sudanese armed forces so that they don't have one group of a very strong component of the armed forces answering to one person and the other one answering to another.
On 12th of June 2023, the IGAD Assembly of Heads of State and Government, having considered the situation in Sudan, established a high-level IGAD mechanism of four, the Quartet, to engage in an effort to resolve the situation in Sudan. I am delighted to convene this first meeting of the Quartet today. In this regard, I welcome the members as well as the representatives of the two parties in Sudan. I also note and wish to thank all the partners that have joined us at this meeting. Pursuant to our decision in Djibouti, our Ministers of Foreign Affairs convened on the 19th of June this year. There has been a number of engagements aimed at securing a cessation of hostilities and commencing dialogue at various levels. During this period, I have also undertaken consultations with a number of neighboring countries, including Egypt, Eritrea, Chad, Central African Republic, as well as the African Union Chair, the President of Comoros, and of course, many hours of planning with my brother, Prime Minister Abiy.
They have clearly decided that they cannot be incorporated, and they certainly now can't live side by side as they have done for the better part of the last decade. So this is really an existential threat for both sides, which unfortunately I think leaves very little room for any kind of mediated or negotiated settlement. And so I think that there's a great fear that you could see outside actors becoming the difference maker in this conflict. We already know, for example, that the Egyptian military has intervened in support of Sudan's armed forces. Libyan rebels have sent arms and other munitions to the RSF. So already we're seeing the start of what could be a regionalization of this conflict. I think as you move out from beyond the immediate neighbors, you start to see powerful states like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. They look at Sudan as a breadbasket for them. They've invested very heavily in the agricultural sector. So they have a real interest in ensuring stability in the country.
Also, Russia has long-standing relationship with Sudan. Russia would like to have access to Port Sudan as a port of call for their own operations in Africa. They also have private military companies there. The Wagner Group is present in Sudan. Conflicts have a way of pushing you to look at things a little closer than you may have looked before. So now we're looking closely at what Russia may be doing in the region. Of course, Russia is not alone.
In all the instances, there has been a strong emphasis in support of the IGAD effort to end the conflict, address the worsening humanitarian crisis, and facilitate engagement in an inclusive political process that restores civilian governance to Sudan. The situation, ladies and gentlemen, in Sudan is grave. As the conflict continues unabated, we are witness to its devastating impact on the people, on Sudan, and on the region. To date, the number of displaced individuals have surpassed the 2.9 million. More than 2.2 million people are internally displaced, while over 640,000 have sought refuge in neighboring countries.
Even before this conflict started, fully 1/3 of the country was reliant on humanitarian assistance, international support. Now that the war has essentially started in the country, access to those communities has been cut off. And so what I fear is really a mass exodus from these cities. And that's going to create, new kinds of humanitarian crises, both in the cities and in those locations where they end up going.
This conflict dampens the excitement about the democratic transition in Sudan. In the West, we talk about democracy, people should really take initiative. What the people of Sudan did. And the international community did not rise to the occasion. It's not too late. I think there is room here to increase engagement. Everybody who has interests, economic and otherwise, would like a Sudan that works. And the way Sudan will work is through civilian rule. And we need to make that a priority.
The war has forced up to 3 million people from their homes. 700,000 have fled to neighboring countries. 27 million Sudanese are affected in some way or another. Diplomatic efforts started in May with a series of meetings in Jeddah under joint US-Saudi supervision. But they all failed to bring about more than brief humanitarian ceasefires that were never respected.
The Sudanese army and people believe this war has been imposed on them and that it's supported by foreign countries, unfortunately. There's an Arab country standing behind it.
The proposed solutions do not contain strategic or smart incentives that could lure the warring sides to serious talks. This war is existential for both sides, and the more it drags on, the more past tragedies it evokes for the Sudanese, which only supplies it with more fuel.
Even as we provide leadership under the AU IGAD framework to resolve the issues in Sudan, because we believe that the conflict in Sudan is completely senseless and unnecessary. And the kind of destruction of life and property and infrastructure is not justified in any way. And the sooner that conflict comes to an end, the better. We are working collaboratively with the Jeddah Initiative, the IGAD AU framework, and also the neighbors framework under the chairmanship of Egypt to consolidate all these initiatives.
On April 15, people in Sudan woke up to the sounds of explosions, artillery shells and airstrikes. Two army generals who came to power in a 2019 coup and shared it for 4 years decided to oust one another. They said it was the only way to achieve a better future for the country. But many believe it's a personal power struggle.
Since the beginning of the mutiny led by the so-called Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, our armed forces took up the full responsibility to crush this treacherous plot and the groups behind it.
Al-Burhan's behind the failure of the political process. He's a criminal and we'll bring him to justice.
And this morning I spoke to former Prime Minister Hamdok, among the people leading the civilian groups that brings together political parties, civil society groups, women groups, youth groups, together to provide a comprehensive framework on how to resolve issues in Sudan and take the country to civilian rule, democratic civilian rule.
The Sudanese army welcomed the proposals and for the first time announced readiness to end the fighting if the RSF withdraws from public buildings and private homes and stops looting. For its part, the Rapid Support Forces said it's willing to negotiate and hand over power to a civilian government. The two sides have sent delegations back to Jeddah to resume talks. With hopes of a decisive victory on the battleground fading, the initial attitude seems to be changing. But there hasn't been any sign of mutual concessions that could lead to peace.
With the legitimacy that comes from the people in democratic elections. And that is the only change of government through democratic elections that guarantees the aspirations of not just our individual countries, but the collective will of the people of this continent. And whatever means necessary that should be used to make sure that these democratic processes are sustained and maintained and protected should be brought to bear to stop those who want to use the barrel of the gun to run the affairs of countries or to manage the issues of our continent.